First of all, I want to thank Clean Cities, the various Clean Cities coalitions that invited me to participate today. This is a big part of my job. Is as I tell when I started with Ford, I said, we really don't want to sell an electric vehicle. We want to sell electrification, right? The vehicles will come. So interacting with groups like this is a great opportunity for me and for Ford to talk about, what are we doing in the world of electrification. But by way of background, very quickly, again, my name is Kevin Neal. I work for the Ford Motor Company. I am the EV sales director for our government affairs group, which really means federal, state, local, municipal, university, any of those type of entities that are working on electrification. My role is to make that easier to deal with. My presentation is going to be relatively short. I want to primarily focus on a couple of tools that Ford makes available to the market, complementary. These really fall into two areas. The first is helping fleets identify which of those vehicle assets would be good candidates for electrification. And the second piece is really more around the financial aspects. Incentives, there's been a lot of discussion already about the changing world of incentives, but we do have a service to help with that to reduce your initial capital investment in electrification, and then a little bit about TCO in the model that we've developed. It's a very specific model. I think it's pretty interesting. But prior to that, I do want to spend a few minutes on Ford and our commitment to electrification. Again, I know it's been discussed already today in a number of different presentations in the last 12 months, change of administration, change of regulations, incentives. Even in the press, you hear these strange stories. So it's been a bit of a turbulent year up and down, but I do want to talk about Ford's vision and what we're investing, hard investments, cement in the ground investments for electrification. First of all, I just want to review, hopefully this is not new to anybody, our current offerings. The Mustang Mach-E, and thanks to Zach from Kaplan Ford for providing a vehicle today. I hope everyone got a chance to see that. It's been a very successful vehicle, both in the fleet and the retail side. Law enforcement, it's finding a little bit of a niche. We've got, I think, 300 units in New York City, so we're quite proud of that. The E-Transit, both in the cargo van and the cab chassis versions, it's, again, a good seller. And my favorite is the F-150 Lightning, certainly in this government space. A quick point about the Lightning and the Lightning with the extended range, as well as the E-Transit. For those fleets in California that are struggling, and I know it is a struggle to meet these ACF regulations, those vehicles, because of their GVWR, may help with that strategy. So certainly, if we can help with that, let us know. Now, a few minutes on EV investment. So Ford has made massive investments in our production infrastructure. These are three examples of brand new plants. This is cement in the ground. This isn't plans for the future. This is happening today. Excuse me. Our first one is Blue Oval City. This is going to be the home of our EV center. It's near Memphis, Tennessee. This is going to be the home of the next gen pickup. So the next next Lightning version will be produced here in Tennessee. We expect that 27, 28 to go live. The second factory there is Blue Oval Battery Park, Michigan. This is about 100 miles west of Detroit, and this is going to be our center for our lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry. And then finally, Blue Oval SK. This is, again, a separate factory going up in Kentucky, about 30, 40 miles south of Louisville. Now, this one's a little more unique because this is a joint venture with SK On. SK On is a South Korean battery manufacturer. So this will be the center for our NCM battery chemistry. So these plants alone, again, brand new plants, cement's in the ground. This represents a total investment of over $10 billion. And again, dedicated to electrification. So I think that's important when you hear these stories about electrification, certainly from Ford, and there's other OEMs as well making these significant investments. And then I want to spend a few minutes on a real exciting announcement that our CEO made last week. For those who may have not heard it, this was our Model T moment, as it was advertised, and where we introduced a new EV platform, and we're calling it the Ford Universal EV Platform. And this is for Ford really a huge bet on the future. So if you think about electric vehicles and the cost of electrifying, we've put in place a new platform, and it's a new way of manufacturing a vehicle for Ford. And the magic of that is really from a costing perspective. You can't produce a moderately priced EV if you can't manufacture the vehicle at a moderate price. So with the new manufacturing process and the LFP battery chemistry, which is much more efficient from a cost perspective, we're going to be introducing these new vehicles off a single platform. It represents a $5 billion investment. This vehicle will be produced in Louisville. The first vehicle we expect off the line is going to be a mid-size four-door electric pickup, targeting the price around $30,000. So it's kind of exciting. And we're expecting to reach customers in 2027. So again, very exciting news from Ford, very important news for Ford, but really for all OEMs that are starting to push their electric vehicles into this more moderate price. This is going to significantly increase the momentum for EV adoption, and it's going to increase the momentum for charging infrastructure investment. So for me personally, that was really kind of a cool announcement. I look forward to that coming to fruition. So now I wanted to focus more on these tools that I've talked about. Again, looking at two different types. One is about identifying candidates for electrification. The other's on the financial side. So again, these are complementary. So anybody who says, "Hey, look, I'd like to take advantage, or I'd like to utilize this tool," reach out to myself or the Ford reps here, and I'll have that contact information. So the first one we call Ford Pro eSwitch Assist, and this is really just a detailed assessment based on energy usage. So we take your data that you provide to us, and we run an analysis on your fleet and provide you some output. And you can imagine the inputs coming in from your fleet are obviously distance. That's one of the primary. Not only distance, but what is your average daily mileage? What is your dwell time for these particular vehicles? Cargo load, that's really just weight. Are you carrying feathered pillows? Are you carrying bags of nickels, right? That's going to have a big difference on how your vehicle performs. Vehicle efficiency, topography. Are you in a mountainous, hilly environment, or are you on a very flat area that's highway, so you don't get to take advantage of regenerative braking, or are you in a more of a city environment, stop and go? Driver-specific impacts, temperature impacts. I think it's very well known that cold weather does affect range. There's no doubt about that. But if you're operating a fleet in Alaska or you're operating a fleet in South Florida, there's different parameters around how you have to plan that electrification strategy. Heating loads, and finally, the impact of your upfit. That's really just a weight issue. So we'll take all this data from your fleet and we run the analysis, and then we'll divide your fleet really into three buckets, keep it simple. The first one is what we call suitable to switch. This is the low-hanging fruit. These are vehicles that can perform their operational requirements throughout the day without any need of recharging during the day. So they go back to the depot or home or whatever your situation is and have enough dwell time to recharge for the next session. The middle group is maybe switch. That has to do with vehicles that need a top-up or an additional charge to perform their tasks during that 8, 12, whatever your operating timeline is. And then finally, may not be suitable. These are really vehicles that need 2 or more charges. Obviously, that's probably not practical for most fleets to have to charge that many times during a day. So we'll take the data in, create that assessment, and then present it back to you. And you can see on the right side of these slides, these are an actual customer of ours that we ran the analysis. They came out about half the vehicles were able to switch, which is good news. Just a couple points about that middle, though, this maybe, I call it maybe switch. There's a lot of things you can do to increase the range to make that vehicle more efficient. And that data we like to look in to see if there's vehicles within that population we can move into suitable. And that could be driver behavior. That could be preconditioning for colder environments. That even may be looking at some of your routing, if you can change your routing. So again, we try to get into this deep analysis to give you the best picture about, hey, how can I electrify? How fast can I electrify if I wanted to? So then I want to get into more of the financial element. Incentives is that is a rabbit hole. I'll go down a little bit, not too far, but lots of changes, obviously, certainly at the federal level. Incentives themselves can be tax rebates, they can be tax credits, they can be vouchers, etc. They cover the whole infrastructure or the whole electrification ecosystem. Think about it: the vehicle, the chargers, the installation of the chargers. Very often, make-ready projects will cover some of the bringing new power surf into your facility. And I've even seen some incentives that, for a limited amount of time, may cover some of your operational costs. So those incentives are out there. Sorry, I jumped ahead there a little bit. Doesn't want me to go back. So we have a dedicated group within Ford that manages this process. So Molly O'Malley, you'll see there, I have her contact information there. She runs this group. She's based out of Detroit. And so what she'll do is simply reach out to her directly and say, hey, I'm interested. She'll get some information, typically geographic location, right? So where are you located? Where are these facilities? Where's power going in? And we'll run this analysis. And what that does look like is kind of this stackable incentive strategy. Start at the federal level. Unfortunately, as you can see, a lot of the federal tax credits and tax vouchers are expiring soon. So 30C, 45W, for those who are familiar with those credits and vouchers, are going to expire at the end of September. So if you are very close to buying EVs, if you are very close to investing in your charging infrastructure, I'd strongly suggest you get your paperwork in because, again, that closes at the end of September. At the state level, 50 states, 50 different programs. Some are richer than others. California, obviously, is much more progressive. I'm not as familiar as much as Nevada. I gave a similar presentation last week in Georgia, and although Georgia's relatively EV friendly, at the state level, it's relatively stingy for certainly for government fleets. But in this example, Energize is a very well-known state incentive. The last project I worked on prior to coming to Ford, I was with a company, a startup based out of San Francisco, and we did depot electrification. We did a 35 odd e-transits in Southern California, and that project was paid off. 90% of that was paid off by Energize funds. So again, something most of you may already be familiar with, but for those who are not, it's certainly an area of investigation. Utility incentives. There's 3,000 utilities in the United States, and I imagine there's 3,000 different incentive programs. So it is very specific to your utility, to your fleet. We just, as an example of Northern California, we use PG&E in some of the programs there. But again, that is the research that we'll do. And then finally, local. This could be city, county. It's all over the place. So just wanted to kind of show you the different areas that we would attack for you. So again, if this is something of interest, it's a complimentary service from Ford trying to help you understand how can you offset some of that initial capital expense for electrification. And then come to my final subject, and this is my favorite one, is total cost of ownership. TCO is nothing new. It's a very mature analytical tool. I've been using it in my 25 years in fleet management. What makes it a little bit challenging is when you start bringing electric vehicles in the analysis, right? It gets a little complicated and you have to be careful, make sure the analysis is really accurate and transparent. So Ford has developed a TCO model that, again, we will do this for any entities that have an interest. But there's a couple things that I think are important when you're looking at a TCO model, because there's quite a few out there. And I'm not saying this is the best, but there's a couple things that we think are critical. First is that you need to bring in those elements of electrification. So you can run an ICE versus an EV, but then you have this kind of, you have this whole infrastructure topic on the side, right? Well, yeah, I'm looking at a TCO, but what about infrastructure? We think it's very important to bring infrastructure into the TCO. Now, that can be very complicated depending on what the customer's philosophy may be, and that's something we do specifically for a client. But that's number one. Number two is it really needs to be very transparent. And we do that at Ford by using third parties. We don't want to put our thumb on the scale here. Ford has got a lot of data, as you can imagine, on all these various elements, but we think it's important to build credibility for the analysis to use third parties. And what I mean by that is Vincentric and Black Book ALG for the residual setting. And so what we'll do is we'll take our individual clients' data. So we don't want to just do a kind of a generic TCO that shows directionally. We like to use very specific data. And I'm going to show you an example. This is a mid-sized city in Florida that asked us to do this. This particular fleet is already using F-150 gas vehicles, have been for a very long time. They want to incorporate Lightnings into their fleet, but they had to prepare some information for their city council to give them an expectation of what did this mean from a TCO. So we use their replacement cycles, 10,000 miles per year, 10-year replacement cycle. And again, I wanted just to accent on the Vincentric data. We use Vincentric data, but here I wanted to call this out just again in full transparency. Vincentric will run this operational data through year 7. So what we did, since this was a 10-year term, we simply straight lined those costs to keep it apples and apples. Most likely, this probably is a bias against EVs, quite honestly. But again, just to keep it simple and transparent, we just did straight line to year 10. Residual ran 10 years, 10,000 miles, fairly straightforward. We use Black Book in this example, but some customers like ALG, again, we're agnostic on that. And then finally, the energy and the fuel costs. We use a U.S. Energy Information Administration. I think they run fuel costs every 2 weeks. They'll publish that. I believe electricity, if somebody knows, correct me. I think that's a monthly figure that they give. So we'll take your location, we'll take fuel pricing in your location, we'll take electricity cost in your location, and we'll run that analysis. So in this example, you'll see the output here. And it's a little bit of a busy slide, so, and you probably can't read that at top, so I'll kind of walk you through. The top row there is the Lightning. That's the total cost of ownership by year up to 10 year for the F-150 Lightning. The second row is the F-150 gas version. And you'll see the green and the red. That simply means year after year, which of those vehicles has a superior total cost of ownership, and that was represented in green. What you'll see is that flip happens for the EV in year 8. So by the time you get to the end of this life of this asset, total cost of ownership for an electric vehicle, in this case Lightning versus the XLT, is going to be about 4% less expensive. Now, people say, well, I thought they were cheaper. I thought they were more expensive. A couple of points here. One is you can see for this client, we agreed upon, per their data, that the investment for infrastructure was going to be about $5,000 per vehicle after incentives, et cetera. So we built that in. So that's already a headwind for your EV, right, from a costing perspective. The second headwind for an EV typically tends to be depreciation. EVs usually depreciate quicker in that first 3 or 4 years. They tend to settle after that. And even in some instances, they tend to, towards the end, get a little bit superior. So you've got those headwinds for the EV up front, but then you have the tailwinds, which obviously is fuel savings and your maintenance savings. So in this case, it takes about 7 years for those positive fuel and maintenance savings to overcome that initial drag of the depreciation and the infrastructure. So still a good story, 4% if you want to electrify. But in this example, we were a bit fortunate because this is a client that is already using quite a few gas F-150s, as I said, I think about 100 in their fleet. And we do get the data from that. Through our connected vehicle telematics, we get the data from the fleet itself. So we are able to, instead of using the EPA MPG of, I think it's 19 and change, for that F-150 gas vehicle, we could actually see what this client's running. And you can see it's significantly less. They're only getting about 9.5 miles per gallon. A lot of this has to do, as you can imagine, Florida, it's idling, right? It's very hot, so they're idling these things constantly. Now, when you plug that actual figure, and you can see the dramatic effect it does have, and shouldn't be a surprise to anybody here as far as savings on fuel, especially if you have a high idling vehicles. But again, I think it's an important tool to interact with your city councils, people who are decision makers, or yourself. Hey, look, this is a new asset class. We've never used electric before. Help me understand, Kevin, what should I expect from a cost perspective? So Ford has built this tool, and it's not meant to be directionally. It's meant to be very specific to your fleet. So we want to go in and pull these data points from your fleet directly. And with that said, it was a very quick presentation. I wanted to open up the questions, but before that, real quick, just some information on some of the folks at Ford. Rick Keithley, who probably most of you know. Rick is all things Ford on the West Coast, so whatever the powertrain, he's in charge of our business out here from a corporate perspective. Molly is our incentive specialist. So again, reach out directly. You can go right directly to Molly, and she'll run that incentive report. And then you have my contact information if there's ever any questions or comments about electrification. Would love to answer any questions on the presentation if there are any. Sir.
Do you know of any plans we'll get cap and bed configurations for the Lightning? For instance, an extended cab and a regular battery.
Not until the next generation, which is coming out. And a quick word on that. I'm new to Ford, so I can be a little critical. Not critical. I can speculate a little more maybe. Ford's strategy, and I think it was a good one, when they first introduced the Lightning and the E-Transit, the idea was they didn't want to do anything earth-shattering. We didn't want to make a Cybertruck. So the idea was to simply electrify an ICE vehicle that people were comfortable with. That's a great idea for market acceptance. It's not necessarily the best idea for coefficient friction and efficiencies of a battery, right? So you suffered a little bit there. The next generation pickup, and again, I can't speak too much to the details that you brought up, but that is going to be designed from the ground up as an electric vehicle. I've seen renditions of it. It's going to look a little different, not as Cybertruck, thank goodness, but it is going to have a different look and feel, a lot more capability, much better aerodynamic, and believe it or not, that can affect up to 20% of your range just the way the vehicle moves through the air. So I wish I could address it more, but it'll be a much more versatile vehicle.
Two questions. One is, what did you say when the next generation would come out? And then the other was relative to the fundamental basis for the analytical tool is essentially energy consumption. So you get their fuel consumption and calculate the energy that that vehicle uses and use that as the fundamental factor about whether it's all day long, one two charges, recharges a day.
Yes, sir.
That's it.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. It's, I don't want to say simplistic, but we're trying to be as transparent as possible. And on the second question, we did push that back. Unfortunately, originally we wanted model year 27. It looks like now that truck will be introduced model year 28, and that will be produced in Tennessee.
So, Kevin, the data you're gathering from a prospective customer, is this platform available to anybody who wants to use it, regardless of where they're at in the buying process?
Yes. Now, initially, we want to interact with you. It's not like you just go online and plug it in. It's there. So this is meant to be an interactive, because there are some deeper conversations, especially if somebody's not electrified. And on the infrastructure side is really important. For instance, we had a client who we did this with, and their infrastructure per vehicle was $70,000. Right. So, well, that doesn't work on a TCO. And the reason it was is because they were overbuilding, future proofing. So the vehicles they were acquiring today
were paying for the infrastructure.
Exactly. They were basically paying for future vehicles, but it was kind of getting outside of the fundamental reason for that TCO.
You would partner with the government organization and say, give me this data, do the analysis. Exactly. A similar pilot program with the telematics company. We put their telematics in 10 vehicles, and they gave an EV suitability scorecard, but it was based on our parameters he could plug in. So I could create either straight A's for the fleet or D's, depending on what I expected out of that fleet, which would be how many miles per day do they run and average utilization per year. Because again, I can't get that data from fuel transactions because they fuel twice a month. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many daily. So again, the telematics argument is put telematics.
Oh, absolutely.
It's determine the daily average use for every vehicle in your fleet.
Yeah, I had again, I hate to keep referring to the company I used to work for, but we had a similar product, and quite a few fleets did not use telematics. And that was a much more difficult nut to crack, so to speak, because it's exactly what you're saying. You're using it out estimates, etc. So a robust telematics data it's critical, not critical. It's very important that you have that to give you the confidence when you recommend, to your point, right? Well, this vehicle, we're safe to electrify that one. You hate to guess and think, well, we think we're safe. Yeah. Well, if that's it, well, thank you so much for your time, everybody. I very much appreciate it.